Hey guys, it's Sports13 here, and today I'm going to be starting a new series on my channel, and this is where I go over each of the top position players in fantasy football throughout the entire NFL season up until week 18, which is the final week of the regular season. And this is the top position players in fantasy going into week 2 of the 2025 season. So on one side, we're going to have the position leaders from last week, and then on the other side, we have one for the overall position leaders. But the reason why I didn't write down the overall position leaders, because we've already finished 1 week into the season. So those 6 are the top position leaders in fantasy football as of now, after 1 week. So those position leaders from last week, starting off with QB, which is Josh Allen. He had 38.76 fantasy points last week in that thrilling comeback on Sunday night against the Ravens, in which the Bills came back down 15 with like 4 minutes left in the game, and then they just won it on a field goal. Yep, and Josh Allen just went off in that fourth quarter, which was why he got to that many points. And he is the only player so far this season that has cracked the 30-point mark in fantasy. And he leads players overall in that stat as well for fantasy points. For running back, RB1 so far after week 1, Derrick Henry. He had 29.2 fantasy points. He would have had 30 as well if he hadn't fumbled. But he had 2 touchdowns, 2 long touchdowns that he scored. I mean, that's what he's always done in his long career. He just runs it down and just runs away for those long touchdowns because of his big size that he's had. And then for the top receiver in fantasy, it's another player that was involved in that thrilling Sunday night game in week 1, the blooming Zay Flowers. He just definitely bloomed like a flower in that game for the Ravens, as he had 28.1 fantasy points in that week 1 loss. So he did score a touchdown last week as well. And then for the tight end, the top tight end in fantasy going into week 2 is Juwan Johnson of the Saints. Now, I didn't expect him. I don't think anyone expected him to be the top tight end in fantasy after week 1. But he had 15.6 fantasy points in the Saints' week 1 loss against the Arizona Cardinals. Now, right behind him is Brock Bowers, who in the Raiders' week 1 win over the Patriots, he unfortunately got injured, Brock Bowers. But I think he should be okay and should be good to go for the Raiders' week 2 Monday night game against the Chargers. So don't be surprised if you see Brock Bowers up here on the list next week, if he does go off. Then the top teams' defense and special teams after week 1 is the Broncos' defense and special teams, who finished with 16 points. Broncos defense and special teams finished as the top defense and special teams units in fantasy last year. Can they try to repeat in that spot, or will we see a new team's defense and special teams, or maybe a new team's defense and special teams maybe for next week as well? Because every week you're going to see a lot of like different players as the top position leaders for each week, as well as the overall position leaders, which change from week to week. And then at kicker, I don't think anybody expected Spencer Schrader to be the top kicker in fantasy after week 1, as he finished with 16 fantasy points in the Colts' shocking week 1 win over the Dolphins. But I think we could see a new kicker up here soon. Maybe like Brandon Aubrey or Chris Boswell, maybe in a few weeks or something like that. Or maybe even after next week. Or after this week. Another thing that I put here is active streaks of players that are the top of their positions for consecutive weeks. So yeah, for example, I just put all the top position players from week 1, and who knows how long each of them will hold those streaks. So, but I think out of those players, I think the most likely ones we could see keep those streaks going are either Josh Allen or Derrick Henry, because those are two big name players. Zay Flowers is also a big name player, but there's also other good receivers out there, such as Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb. Although both Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase kind of struggled a bit. Although Justin Jefferson scored a touchdown in that Monday night win for the Vikings. And Jamar Chase didn't really do much. But those two are we're gonna eventually see them more on this list in the coming weeks and make multiple appearances here. And of course, and that red plus sign indicator that indicates if any of the top position leaders from a week ago, either them have gotten injured or any of the overall position leaders have gotten injured. That's why you'll see that plus indicator, so keep an eye on that. And if any of these 6 top position players hold for next week, you'll see a times and then a number next to their name. So like, for example, if Josh Allen holds the top spot as QB1 in fantasy after week 2, you'll see ×2 next to his name there, because he's been the top QB in fantasy. It would mean that he would be the top QB in fantasy for 2 straight weeks. And if he keeps on holding that position, then that would be 3 weeks, 4 weeks, and like so on. And who knows how long he'll hold that. Anyways, hope you all love this new series that I kind of came up with. And stay tuned for next week's top position players for fantasy football, to see which new players we'll see on here. Anyways, and I'll see y'all later.